Deval Patrick took steps to pull from history and made his inauguration day more historic. The Commonwealth's first black governor had the title passed to him outside in front of thousands.
Are you fired up? Are you ready to go?
Crisis happened. How big is the challenge for you and how you navigate that?
I made the point then, and I still believe, I wasn't trying to raise expectations of me. I was trying to raise our expectations of ourselves as citizens. And in a democracy, you don't get unanimity on anything.
Former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick is expected to announce he's running for president.
Never been done this late in the game. That's right, guys. He's a 63-year-old former two-term governor of Massachusetts, the first African-American to serve as governor of Massachusetts.
The job is about trying to serve everybody. So we're supposed to do what we can in our time to leave things better for those who come behind us.
Anybody stand out to you?
I think they all had their moments.
You probably wouldn't be having this interview if I'd lost that race. But like I said, it was a moment where it felt like I was hungry for something a lot of other people were hungry for too, and it was not on offer.
Hi everyone. It's a very special day today because we have Governor Deval Patrick of Massachusetts. Governor Deval, a professor in Harvard Kennedy School, teaching courses specialized in leadership and management. Thank you, Governor Deval, for being here. It's a pleasure for me.
Thank you. Very kind of you to have me, Siaki.
Before we talk about leadership, would you tell me briefly about your childhood, your family, and your education background?
Sure. Well, I grew up on the south side of Chicago, which is actually the city from which I'm speaking to you right now. I spent most of that childhood living with my grandparents and my mother and sister and various other relatives. It's sort of a, in those days, classic multi-generational household. We were not wealthy by any means. In fact, we were poor and struggled and were on public assistance. I went to, big, overcrowded, under-resourced, sometimes violent public schools. But we had a strong sense of community because that was a time when all of the children were under the jurisdiction of every adult on the block. So if you messed up down the street in front of Ms. Jones's, she'd straighten you out as if you were hers and then call home. And I think there was a sense that, that being a member of community was about understanding the stake that we had in one another, that we owed each other something, that we were responsible for each other. And a lesson that has stuck with me, by the way. Throughout my professional life. I had a chance to go to a boarding school outside of Boston on scholarship, a school called Milton Academy, and from there to Harvard College, the first of my family to go to college. And eventually when I went to graduate school, I went to Harvard Law School as well. So I got launched in many people's views by having those great classroom educational experiences and some fantastic schools with fantastic reputations. But I also got launched because of those lessons on the street and in the neighborhood that I got from the adults on the South Side. So
it's interesting. The very first day I came to Harvard Kennedy School, they gave me this pen, What is Your Why? Emma gave me, and the very last class I attend, I have this from you, Remember Your Why. It's like a very good beginning and a very good ending. So what shapes you become a politician? What's your why, Professor? Because you keep asking your students, me, and now I'm asking you.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. So first of all, I want to say that my own why has to do with this notion that we are members of community with some shared responsibility for each other. And that one of those responsibilities has to do with a lesson I think every one of us learned from our grandparents, that we're supposed to do what we can in our time to leave things better for those who come behind us. Whatever that is, and whatever ways we can. for me, that why has not been limited to politics or to government. It's the way I have tried to conduct myself in the private sector, where I have spent most of my professional life as well, and more to the point, in my personal life with my family and friends.
So, do you have any patron or a mentor, source of inspiration? I want to be this politician in the future.
I have, well, there are certainly political figures I have read about and whom I have met, whom I respect tremendously. Barack Obama is an old friend. I've read a lot about the leadership of, also the personal history of Winston Churchill, and there are things I don't like, but there are a lot of things that I admire about how he thought about leadership in a very different context and time. I knew Shimon Peres some in at the end of his life, and I think he had evolved over time and thought about his role and the role of the State of Israel in a very wise way at the time of his life. I'm sad to say I don't think that the current leadership shares that wisdom. But yeah, these are people I think of not because of the positions they attained, but because of their approach, that sense of generational responsibility, that willingness to think big and to have an ambitious agenda for the people they led, even if it isn't all going to be accomplished in a term or in a lifetime.
I'm so curious. You're talking about being a lawyer, because I really want to be a lawyer back then, but I didn't get to. If you can tell me what 2 or 3 key takeaways or key skills that you think you learned a lot from law school.
Well, I'm probably one of the few people you'll ever meet educated in America who had a good time in law school. I loved law school. I really did. And some of my key mentors were from law school. One very basic skill set that I learned in law school was the importance of relevance, because you have to learn how to parse through a lot of different information and just focus on those facts and decisions that are relevant to what it is you're trying to accomplish. Not favorable, but relevant. In other words, not just the facts that are on your side, but the ones that actually bear on the decision that has to be made by you, your client, by a court, what have you. And I find that there's an awful lot of political grandstanding that and debate that goes off on tangents and isn't about what's right in front of a policymaker. So that's one. The second is there's a way that lawyers communicate, and particularly trial lawyers communicate, that I respect a great deal. I love language. I love communication. There are some marvelous political and public speeches that have had a real impact on me. Some I've heard and some I've read about, for example. I think lawyers can often be really great at distilling a complicated issue into simpler language. Because mindful that you're not trying to show how smart you are, you're trying to reach as many people as possible and bring them along. And then the third really has to do with that point about bringing along, and that is the room and the importance of persuasion. Again, that you're not just trying to appeal to folks who already agree with you in politics. If it's a functioning political environment, you want to actually try to persuade people to come with you, and they may not like you, but they still deserve to understand what is at stake. And I think all three of those skill sets bear on that, but particularly this notion of respecting persuasion as a skill set, as having an appropriate place in a functioning democracy.
And that's definitely relevant to be in business leaders or in the political leaders, is it?
I think so. I think so.
How you deal with those who not coming to your priorities?
And we have to do what we can right now for our people.
Now, I'd like to talk with you more to learn about your experience, especially when you were being the governor. You become a governor of Massachusetts in 2007, and 1 year later, crisis happened, subprime mortgage, the largest crisis in the United States since the Big Depression. How big is the challenge for you, and how you navigate that?
Well, it's interesting. When I was first elected, I remember reporters asking me about all the expectations, as they put it, that I had raised about what we were going to do. And I made the point then, and I still believe, I wasn't trying to raise expectations of me. I was trying to raise our expectations of ourselves as citizens. And so when the Great Recession hit, I remember a meeting of our Council of Economic Advisors. There was a Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, and it was led by the former president of the Federal Reserve in Boston, and it had labor economists and financial experts and business leaders on it. And they convened and they said, Governor, we think you ought to know that historically, Massachusetts has gone deeper into recession and stayed longer than most other states in the United States. And then the chair paused and I said, yes. And they said, well, we just thought you ought to know. And I said, well, that's good to know, but that's not a strategy. We're not going to wait for external circumstances. We have to do what we can right now for our people and with our people. And so together we focused on a strategy that was about education, innovation, and infrastructure. And there were reasons for each of those pieces. And there were things that we wanted to do to execute that strategy as government. But there were also things where we wanted partnerships with the private sector, with the not-for-profit sector, with universities and colleges and teaching hospitals. And out of that came initiatives like our life sciences initiative, like our clean tech initiative. Interest rates were low, our credit rating was high, so we invested a tremendous amount in public infrastructure because it creates jobs in the short run, but also a platform for private investment and personal ambition. And I'm very proud of the fact that strategy helped us come out of recession faster than most other states. We were number one in America in student achievement, in healthcare coverage, in entrepreneurship, in veteran services, and so many other things, and at a 25-year employment high. Again, because we were trying to shape our own future, and we were trying to set a tone that it was within our collective power, not government's power, but the people's power and imagination to think more ambitiously about our future and reach for it.
Yeah, I read the news that you signed a bill of $1 billion for life sciences in 2008. And
yes.
I was about to ask what's your priorities, but you just said it. So my question is, how you do the prioritization? Because being a governor definitely have multidimensional problems, and so many people wants your attention, wants your focus, and you have to put priorities anyway, and you cannot satisfy anyone. But how you set the priorities, and more importantly, how you deal with those who not coming to your priorities?
Well, so I think setting priorities is a challenge in any leadership job. I think big part of it is trying to understand the difference between crisis and routine. There's so much crisis that comes up. Some things are presented as crises that aren't really crises, but there's an urgency about them that takes your attention from or could from what you want the agenda to be, what you're trying to drive. And I think just trying to keep that in balance, delegating as much as possible to others so that you can continue to focus on the things that are the most pressing and that are going to have the most long-term and lasting impact on people. And that was a daily challenge, but I think it is for any leader. And in a democracy, you don't get unanimity on anything. But I don't believe in trying to lead just the people who agree with you already. I think that campaigning is one thing, but once you win, I really do believe the job is about trying to serve everybody, and that means you have to go and deal with the folks who don't agree with you. Try to persuade them. Sometimes you bring them along. But at least you've shown them the respect of having heard out their objections. Frankly, sometimes those objections make your own ideas better, right? They make you rethink. They make you refine your points of view. I will say, Siaki, I think that last instinct or skill comes from having been trained as a lawyer, and particularly as a courtroom lawyer, right? Because you have to think about what the other side's argument is and prepare for that. You have to prepare for that. Otherwise, you can't be effective in court.
Talking about democracy and politics, in many occasions, you have to face a tricky decision making where your political party wants A and your heart, your belief says B. How you navigate that?
Well, so as you know, we are not a parliamentary system. So we have political parties that have platforms, but we have lots and lots of members who don't buy 100% of what either party is selling. And by the way, we have lots and lots of citizens who don't buy 100% of what either party is selling. I think I think there's a kind of particularly nowadays, it seems to require more kind of political courage to be open-minded, to be open to another party's approach to solving some problem or some elements of truth that you hear in the opposition. But I do think that's how you get more lasting change, and it's part of persuasion, right? Not compromise for the sake of compromise, but compromise for the sake of actually getting outcomes that can help. So I'm a Democrat, but I'm not the sort of Democrat who thinks you have to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat, or you have to hate people who disagree with you in order to be a member in good standing of your own party. And some would say that's an old-fashioned way of being in politics, but I think it's the only meaningful way to make change.
I see. So if we take a look now from my perspective from Indonesia, the world is getting even more and more polarized. And we see nowadays threats of wars increasing. Even the United States facing threats of multiple fronts of war. What do you think the challenge of the future leaders and what's the difference with your era?
Well, I think first of all, we have to confront the fact that, as you say, we are divided, but we are also actively being divided in this country by forces domestic and abroad, and there is technology now that enables the amplification of division, all out of proportion to what people are actually experiencing in their lives. And so you feel, and I sense, I had a hunch about this, but I've been doing some work through a research project we call it Shared America for more than a year now, which confirms a lot of that. People are mostly tuning out all of that drama, which is itself a threat to our democracy, right? Because if all you do is sit on the sidelines and watch, and you see it for the, for the sort of entertainment it's designed to be, then we get what we deserve. If the good people are not participating, are not engaging, and only the folks who are drawn to the drama are engaging, then you get that kind of you get the result of the amplification of that drama. So I think leaders do have to pay attention to the fact that there are forces at work doing this and using technologies, social media primary among them, to do so. And we can do something about that. I do not believe that the First Amendment here in the United States is the barrier it has been treated as being. That's the first thing. The second is we have to have leaders willing to engage with with the other side. It doesn't mean compromising your convictions. I don't think that leaders without conviction are very effective leaders, but leaders without humility are also not effective leaders. And it just might be that there's a good idea that the other side has. Now, I'll tell you what I do worry about in this respect, Siaki, if I can go on a bit of a tangent. When Barack Obama was president, his idea, he was interested in expanding healthcare, in fact, in universal healthcare. And the model he chose was a Republican idea. It was one that many were on record supporting. And it had come up, it had been devised through a conservative think tank. As soon as President Obama said, I like that idea, let's try that, politicians on the Republican side said, we don't like that anymore, and acted like they'd never heard of such a thing. Including, I'm sorry to say, Mitt Romney, who had signed a bill very like that when he was governor of Massachusetts, which then fell to me to implement. So if we have political leaders who are, frankly, out of ideas and are only looking for who is or who is not aligned, then we have big trouble in front of us. What we need leaders today to be about is not just accumulating their political popularity and capital, but their willingness to spend that political capital for progress. And I still think there are lots and lots of citizens in this country who want that kind of leadership, who ache for that kind of leadership, and who will respond to that kind of leadership. And I hope that's true in other parts of the world as well.
Do you think we are now in the good progress of democracy?
You know, if you live in outside of a battleground state, nobody talks to you. You can.
And talking about democracy, I'm sorry if the topic's quite sensitive because of the cultural background, but you are the first Black American to become the governor of Massachusetts, and the way Barack Obama did as a president of the United States. And do you think we are now in the good progress of democracy, or is there any setbacks because of the growing populism, for instance, and how you picture our democracy in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think democracy has never moved in a straight line, at least in the United States. It's always been an experiment. There's always been a push and a pull. I reject the rhetoric I sometimes hear that we are worse off today than we used to be in the United States, because I'm going to tell you, my ancestors would not say that. And I will say that in worse circumstances, or circumstances that were pretty bad, they still had the hope that someday they produce me and Barack Obama and many others like us. And I think we owe it to them. Frankly, I think we break faith with them. I feel that way if I don't try to keep that hope alive and keep it going. We have some real challenges facing our democracy, but some of them are also opportunities. I'll tell you this. When I listen to what are described as the grievances of white working people in this country or rural people, the economic uncertainty, the social isolation, the despair as measured by things like addiction rates or suicide rates, they are the exact same wounds that Black and brown people who are poor in cities have been feeling for generations. And the notion that some of our leaders treat the one as responsible for the other, instead of helping us see that we are sharing pain right now, and that our solutions can also be shared. They can also be bridges to help us build together, is a huge missed opportunity. I think President Biden tries. I don't think he always hits the mark, but I think that's where his heart is. I think that's what he's trying to do. But there's so much of our own political rhetoric in the United States today, Siaki, that is about, appealing to sectors or interest groups and so forth, and not to all of us as a whole. And as I say, it's the I guess the way I would put it, I'm sorry I'm going on so long, but this is really on my heart these days. I would say I am more and more persuaded that the dynamic politically in the United States is not so much Democrat, Republican as it is insider, outsider. And that most people feel outside. And I'm not surprised. If you, in a presidential race, when everybody's the most focused on politics, about a third of Americans who are eligible don't vote. And they don't vote just because it's inconvenient, but because they don't think it matters. If you live in outside of a battleground state, nobody talks to you. You could think the thing doesn't have anything to do with you at all. Or if you're a Republican in a so-called blue state or a Democrat in a so-called red state, nobody's talking to you. We don't make, it's back to this point about community. We aren't talking about the shared investment that we have in each other as Americans. And, your experience may be different as a Black person or a brown person or an immigrant or as a poor person or as a rich person. Your experience may be different from others, but we have some shared pain, some shared anxiety, and we have some shared opportunity. And that is what I want to hear our leaders talk about and lead from. And I think as they do, our democracy has a much brighter future.
What's your momentum? What's the secret?
And I loved that job. I went broke, but I loved the job. I couldn't afford to stay in it for 2 terms.
If I want to be governor like you, that's the question of the more than 70 students in your class last time. Vivian really wants to be like you. When I told her, Vivian, I wish you become a very good mayor. No, not mayor. I want to be governor of Massachusetts, she said. So what kind of leadership criteria that you suggested must have for the future leaders who wants to be in a public office?
Well, I think, I acknowledge that this is, I still feel like this is a minority view, this isn't the customary way of thinking about politics. So I think the customary way is, become famous in some way or another, raise a great deal of money and try not to, upset anybody. I think first of all, stand for something. Have a reason why you want to serve. Why that job? And is that job the one where you think you can serve the thing that motivates you, that the contribution you feel you want to bring? As I said earlier, I wanted an ambitious agenda for Massachusetts. I wanted for us to remind ourselves we could think big. I mean, after all, our Commonwealth is, we invented the United States, for Pete's sake. First Constitution, first public school, first public library. You can go on down the first statement of human rights in a Constitution in the United States. So I think it is really important for us to remind ourselves that we are able to think about and plan beyond the horizon. And I thought I could do that from the perspective of governor differently than I could as a member of the legislature or as a mayor, for example. I think also critically important to get as proximate as possible to the people you want to serve. So that it isn't just your ideas, it's the people you want to serve, what they feel they want their government to be about, and to address. Doesn't mean you have to buy it all, but you learn a ton, and it just sharpens and refines your own approach. And I think particularly if you were like me and you didn't have any money, you didn't have any name recognition, you didn't have a whole team of people running a grassroots campaign, was not just a philosophical choice, but it was also the most pragmatic way to break in, and why not? It's the most democratic way too.
I read running for office is also about momentum. I mean, you told me you come from a working class, and you're also a minority that has not been precedented before, but you made it anyway. What's your momentum? What's the secret? What's the thing that you see? This is it. This is a time, and I can make it.
So you mean as governor?
Yeah.
Well, it's not like I always wanted to be governor, but I did, as I said, I wanted more conviction. I wanted more sense of mission from the people who were presenting themselves for public offices. Like people, I kept experiencing people, and I mentioned this in our class, who seemed to want to have this or that job, but not actually do it. They didn't want to present an ambitious agenda because that might turn off somebody who might vote for them. I wanted them to have a vision. And I think for me, this notion of generational responsibility, that we're supposed to do what we can in our time with the skills we have to leave things better. As I said, I felt like I had done that where I could in the private sector. And I felt like we were about to get more of the same old kind of leadership in the governor's race. And I thought we could do better. And I didn't see anybody else trying. And it was the right time in my own life, my family's life and experience for us to take that chance. And so we did. And then this term, you lift as you climb. That I've had so many people at stages in my life take a chance on me, and I've tried to be that kind of person, just to pass it on, just to take a chance on others. And as I said, believe it or not, my view of leadership, political leadership, is that I wasn't asking people to take a chance on me. I was asking them to take a chance on their own aspirations. I knew they also wanted a sense of mission and ambitious. I knew it. I talked to enough people, and the more people I talked to, the more I was convinced that it was true. But that wasn't on offer most of the time, and And so I thought, well, maybe I'll offer it.
So you said about being in private sectors before. Being a governor or being a politician, is it since the beginning your aspiration, or is it mid-career shift of your?
I was, I think, 50 years old when I became governor, and it was not something I always wanted to do.
Oh, it's not?
It was not. I was the first office I'd ever run for. I had one public office in the Clinton administration when I was appointed to head the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department. And I loved that job. I went broke, but I loved the job. I couldn't afford to stay in it for 2 terms. But I really enjoyed the policymaking. I enjoyed the advocacy. I enjoyed the engagement with folks of different opinions, and I loved leading a team. And again, asking them to be more ambitious, supporting them as they leaned forward. But I didn't always want to be governor, and I felt that the running for office was such a painful thing, much like the conversation in our class together. The running for office was so off-putting, I couldn't possibly imagine putting myself and my family through it. But as I say, when the moment seemed to present itself, I was ready to step away, at least for a time, from the private sector. I like the private sector, and I think it's important to understand that language. And I think, frankly, most of the big challenges that face humankind are not going to be solved by one sector working on its own. It's going to require cross-sector collaboration, and I think learning how to do that was important to me. Yeah, you probably wouldn't be having this interview if I'd lost that race. But like I said, it was a moment where it felt like I was hungry for something a lot of other people were hungry for too, and it was not on offer from anyone else.
He seems so popular. Even many polls put him as a leading candidate.
Or you can play a different game. You can change the game. That's what Barack Obama did.
And talking about risk and liabilities, being in public office, in the session of the class, you mentioned about hot button issues. And I really like it because I think that's the reason many people decided not to run when they're balancing the liabilities and how strong is the why.
Yeah.
How because being exposed to political liability, how should young generation manage it, and how we should learn to navigate it, especially nowadays social media and information is more easily accessible?
Well, first of all, I think politics has always been rough in this country in one form or another. It's always intrusive. I mean, even if it's polite, it's so demanding, and so it's going to just the amount of time you spend is going to intrude on other things important to you and your family. That happens, but I think we need good government, and we aren't going to. Well, we need good policy. We aren't going to get good policy until we get better politics. We're not going to get better politics until we get better people who are willing to take some of those chances and endure some of that intrusion. And I think there is something to be said for the tone that is set. You can play that game, or you can play a different game. You can change the game. That's what Barack Obama did when he ran for president the first time. He changed the game. It's not like there weren't vicious attacks and negative ads and all that sort of thing. But the game was so changed that many, many more people came into the process. And they weren't just, young people who were eligible to vote for the first time, there were lots of people who hadn't voted in a long time, who decided to get involved, and who were reminded that, as I say, in a functioning democracy, you have all the power you need to make all the change you want, but you have to invest yourself. You can't treat it as a spectator sport and see what the outcome is going to be. You have to get in and shape it and do stuff. And I think, he would acknowledge, and I know David Axelrod would acknowledge, they approached that campaign nationally because of what we did in Massachusetts. And I believe in that kind of politics. I really do. I think social media makes it both easier and more difficult. It makes it easier to reach more people with less money. It makes it more difficult because negativity and falsehoods and rumors reach more people too. I don't think that social media is a substitute for human connection. It just isn't. And I think that we were sold in the early days that social media was going to be the great connector, when in fact, there really is nothing like being in the room with somebody else, being on the sidewalk with someone else, looking them in the eye, having them see your body language and you theirs, having them, it's a human thing. And so this notion of community that I was talking about earlier, I think we're all hungry for it. I think we have to see past the technology as a substitute for that and build the kinds of campaigns and kind of networks and ultimately the kind of civic life where people feel seen and heard and that they have a stake, not just in the election outcomes, but in the outcomes from the private and the public sector that will make a better way for themselves and their families.
And talking about negative exposure, I really want to know about your opinion about Donald Trump with the recent so many scandals from tax evasion, sexual misconduct. But on the other hand, he seems so popular. Even many polls put him as a winning candidate for the presidential race. How did it happen?
Well, I don't know all the answers. I will say that when he was elected the first time, I said publicly, look, he wasn't my candidate, but he is my president, and I'm not going to cheer for him to fail. I hoped, I think probably naively, that the weight and significance of the job would cause him to grow. I was wrong. That is not who he is. I don't know that every scandal is disqualifying, but the lawlessness is, in my view, in a country that and a democracy that is meant to be based on laws and not of men. I am not dismissive of his supporters, again, because I think I think President Biden believes, and by the way, President Biden, I believe, will win. It'll be closer than it should. But I think President Biden believes his job as president is to serve the people who voted for him and the folks who didn't as well. And I think that is right. But I think there is a kind of a license that Mr. Trump's public life has given to an awful lot of people to behave badly, to be dismissive, to treat a difference of opinion as evil and not just as a difference of opinion or a difference of approach. And in that respect, I will say Mr. Trump is not the first to do this in our history or the first in a trend of some while of demonizing, you can go all the way back to Newt Gingrich, of demonizing the opposition as people, as demonizing their character because they have a difference of approach or or opinion. And we need leaders, I think, as decent as Joe Biden to be a counterweight to that. That is harder and harder to do in an environment of social media, as you say, where if you don't embrace the whole agenda, somehow or other you're disqualified from membership in the party or the club. But I think that's a mistake, and I think people are waking up to that.
All right, closing statement for the future leaders from you.
Well, I guess I would say some of what I said in our last class, Siaki. There are lots of reasons why good people don't put themselves forward for public office. Lots of good, sound reasons. Do it anyway, because we need better government. We need government to do its role in helping people help themselves, not to solve every problem in everybody's life, but to help people help themselves. And in order for that to be meaningful, in order for that to be lasting, we need the best people to put themselves forward and set a different tone. And I believe if enough people do it, we will get a government deserving of the goodness of our people.
Thank you, Governor Deval Patrick, for your time. It's an honor to have you here.
The honor is mine, Siaki. I wish you well. Take care.